I've never used this phone before, so I don't know.
Yeah, I saw a different number. Jenny just texted me. Is it a new?
Turn yours up.
Is that better?
Hang on. Try again.
Testing.
Okay, it's on speaker now.
The new handset, you mean?
Yeah. What I have here is we had landline 2893, and the cell wants to make connections with people who are interested in investing in the project here and want to do it through this line. So what they asked me to do was to change the line, discontinue the landline, and replace it with a cell phone. Same number, but cell phone, and the landline then doesn't work anymore.
Oh, okay.
And they have the means of knowing who's calling before the phone rings and can cut in if it's one of the people that they believe are interested in the financing. Of course, none of the financing will be allowed to go ahead until there is a resolution of the problem of Jennifer and compensation for what they've done to her, and as well for the house here on the farm and what they've done to it. That's always going to be the first step. But because time is getting short and they have to do things, what I have been told is that you have to understand where they're coming from. Their technology is so far ahead of this stuff that they need some training here. They either were involved before technology became what it is, and now they're involved with technology beyond, including the Catmobile and stuff. So this is kind of a going back in time for some, going forward in time for some. And what they want to do is set up a company called Cell Investigations Unlimited. And 26 people will have, in the cell, will have this cell phone, basically a version of this same phone, and be on the farm. Each one will have the equivalent of an acre because they want to check the sound levels and stuff all over the place. And how it interferes or doesn't interfere with their own systems of communications. And this is my first time that I've used the phone for a conversation. I've kind of looked at it without doing much, but try to figure out what the buttons do and that kind of stuff. So if I sound a little confused over it, that's why.
No, it's fine.
Okay. So we're at a point now where you wanted to have a conversation, and I'm going to pass it over to you to ask whatever question you want at this stage of the game and see if I can answer.
Okay, I have Jared on too.
Hey, Glenn.
Joined us.
Hello,
Hi.
Glenn.
Hi, Jared.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. How many people we got on the line today there?
Just three of you, including you. It's three people.
And the other thousands that are listening. But yeah.
Yeah.
but just us.
The few thousand security forces around the world who are listening in.
They've been waiting. Yeah.
But they're not adding anything to the conversation. They're just on the other end.
Yep.
So.
Well, I guess the most obvious thing first would be all the things happening to the U.S. and Mexico, and with the weather and earthquakes and burning of the land and water moving on the land. And I know you had spoke about Gomorrah, Sodom and Gomorrah, but I'm noticing it's that, but it's spread out in different locations. It's not all in one location happening. So you have the burning on one part of the country, the flooding on another part of the country, and the earthquake in another part.
Well, what we are basically living through, from what I understand, is what one could read about in stories about Moses saying, "Let my people go," whereas we're saying, "Let my people come," and that starts with Jennifer. And as long as the bureaucrats who are running the world today don't do something as was requested in the thing that you have on the site by the Pineal Court in creation, then it's a matter of raising the intensity, like Moses' 10 plagues, until he was allowed to leave Egypt. As far as I understand, not only are the most visible things that one would read about or see in the media happening, but there are also a number of personal things that are allowed to be to go ahead that otherwise would have been stopped by creation. And they all have to do with the fact that common denominator to major illnesses for individuals, such as heart attacks or strokes or Alzheimer's or all of that, the common denominator is clumping. We've talked about that before. Clumping of glands in a manner in which they interfere with the operation of other glands within the body, and that's done through a process called electromagnetism. Water is the mode of transmission. Magnetism exists within the earth. There's a balance. If the electric company interferes with that balance, it creates the equivalent of a plate on which is developed a magnetic field, and everything within that magnetic field reacts, and it reacts not only on weather and things like that, hurricanes and storms of all kinds, earthquakes, but it also reacts on life. Think of it as the sun sends out waves of information from the sun. A tree has receptors called leaves. It absorbs that information, carries it through the twigs into the branches, into the trunk, and down into the ground around it, and generates energy in the normal magnetic system that exists underground, which then in turn raises a magnetic cloud around, and therefore things grow. What grows becomes a problem. A cancer, for example, is glands that grow in whatever specialty they're made for human beings, for example. And if they grow beyond, if they clump up and grow beyond their task, making an arm, curing a cut, fixing an earache, all of that stuff, if they go beyond that, then the merging of all of that energy confuses the glands and leads to illnesses. So, although we may read about what's going on in Florida right now, for example, there are as well millions of smaller events that are happening in the bodies of people around the world. People are getting Alzheimer's. People are getting strokes, heart attacks, lung, breast cancer, all of those things that would normally be in balance are off balance. So we're reading and seeing the bigger things that affect, and it's going to get worse unless the bureaucrats grasp the concept and stop doing the things that they're doing. You have to remember, in history, there was a time when monarchs, royals, ruled the world in different parts. They had their kingdoms. And it became clear that change had to come about. And in 1789, there was an event called the French Revolution. And what happened was the people who were middle class, who worked for the monarchs, revolted and threw the bums out or chopped their heads off or told them that they would have a different arrangement in the future. And the monarchs lost the power that they had. The problem that has occurred over the last 200 years is the bureaucrats who had the revolution on behalf of the people became, for all intents and purposes, the monarchs themselves. And the problems that they had tried to resolve back then are the problems they are creating now. You can't speak to a person at a hospital at a school board, at a city council, without always feeling that they believe they're superior to the people they're supposed to be serving. And as long as that continues, things are heading in a bad direction. The information that I have and was given is not unknown to most of those people at the higher levels of bureaucracies. That's why the name bureaucracy, bureaucrat, is made up of bureau, which is the French word for office, and then you have crats. So C is for cats, R is for rats. Cat-rat evolution in time was the passing of power from the rat who did the exploration to the cat who did the running of the job of making things better. And because we're in that decision-making period, things have been laid out on a chart, which I've spoken to you about, that shows things are going to get worse, especially in the last 40 years. And what appears to me to be on that chart an end point is 2058. And 2058 is the middle of a 8-year range, 4 years either side. So it could be as low as 2054 or as high as 2062. But that's the range. And if you back up from 2058, 40 years, that's next year. What the cell wanted to do was to have me investigate who in my world are causing the problems. Which person should be considered for trial and sentencing in a manner linked to what they are doing to people themselves. So if they are stealing from people, stealing from them would be the charge that they would be tried on and penalized for. If what they're doing, however, which is much more likely, participating in a plan called genocide, which is the destruction of human beings based on what their genetic makeup is, because they have been working for a 10,000-year period from 8,000 BC to the current time at genetically engineering human beings into what they need in slaves who do their own shopping. So if what they wanted to have was a group of people who would work on a space program, they took all of the ones that had the interests in space and had worked on any activity linked to space and got the genetics out of those people and could then insert it into an egg that would be brought to term and a person would be born through genetic engineering that would have those qualities. Now, that can't be done overnight. It can't be from one person to the other and everything else remains the same. What it has to be is an evolutionary path where slight changes are made at each level, and sometimes they go too far in doing something without realizing what the end product would bring, and therefore they have to go backwards, destroying the people that they've made, and recalibrate their recipes for the next attempt. And the Bible describes that as war, pestilence, famine, and disease as the means by which you stop an event and bring it backwards, usually because people don't know the exact product. They go too far, so it becomes kind of a zigzag. You're going up to the right if that's what you're looking for. You end up with a problem, you turn it left and go up towards the left. Unfortunately, don't stop at the right place and keep on going. And all of a sudden you realize you went too far, so you pull out your war, pestilence, famine, and disease program, kill off the people that you've got going there and start over, bringing it back. And that's basically what they've done over the last 10,000 years. But creation and the pineal court that speaks on creation's behalf, and the cell who carry out the instructions of the pineal court, have come to the conclusion that this process over the last 10,000 years has gone too far, that it cannot be reversed. In the past, if you lived in an area, let's say England, and things had gone too far, and you weren't allowed to be yourself, you would simply get a boat, get on the boat, cross the ocean, set up areas depending on what your tasks or wishes or wants would be for the future, and start up again in a different place. This particular example is the United States of America, managed by bureaucrats who may live in the United States of America, but may be taking instructions from people that Americans have never heard of who live in Canada, for example. And Canada, in order to balance off what appears to strangers to be the better place because it pays more or has more chances for employment, and the weather's better and everything, that the United States would be a good place to go, whereas in Canada, the weather is not as good, the salary is not as good, and it limits the number of people, which allows the real controllers to work without the interference of being in the middle of the situation. They're evolving called the United States. So if you look back in history, during Prohibition, for example, the controllers of Prohibition and the removal of Prohibition lived in Canada. And they got whiskey from Scotland and brought it into Montreal, and from Montreal to Winnipeg. And they also set up the mob in, Las Vegas and all of that stuff. And finally, the ultimate media, which is Hollywood. If you live in California, Southern California, you get to understand the influence that Canadians have in all things that deal with controlling the mind of people in the United States. So, creation gave instructions to the Pineal Court that the people who have no knowledge of any of this going on, which is the majority all over the world, should be given an opportunity to hear what they are not allowed to hear by their media, which includes mass media and religion and politics and all of the professional societies that judge themselves, like lawyers and accountants and whatever. And the people should be given an opportunity to hear the story without interference, see some of the evidence, and the place to do that would be this particular place I'm sitting on, which is a 34.2-acre farm. Fairly centrally located if you consider the majority of people coming from Montreal, New York, Chicago, Toronto, and everything in between, all the states in between, Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania, Vermont, all of that group of people leading down to New York and Washington. So having a project set up on this farm on a 2,000 square foot footprint on the ground. When I said set up, I don't mean going up, but instead going down into the ground. This project of about 24 stories to 27 stories, depending on what the final plan is. And it'll be a class room convention type of place where how people should be treated in hospitals should be under the system that creation had originally set up, how orphans should be treated, how the elderly should be treated, how police should deal with citizens as servants of the citizens rather than the bullies. You know, they used to be called coppers, which is pennies, and that was the money they were making. They were at the bottom of the totem pole, but over the last 20 years or so, well, a little more, probably back to about 1975, 76. Their salaries and overtime pay and everything now average out at over $100,000 a year, which is at least twice the average family. But the product that you have as a citizen in a police force is worse than what you had when they were only being paid pennies. They cared more about their clientele being their financiers, the people who paid their salary, than they do today. Today, it's like they're the bosses. So all of that has to be explained to those who care and who want to come and hear. And the goal, as far as I was told at the beginning, and I don't know if the time frame has changed, I doubt it, because it's all a pretty fixed time frame from beginning to end now. By the year 2020, people must know what's going on, must have had an opportunity to hear so that they can make decisions for their future. As your optometrist will tell you once he adjusts your eyeglasses or fixes your eyes, 2020 means you see clearly. And what I have seen since coming to the farm and starting this investigation into who's causing the problem, that kind of stuff, is a reaction which one cannot consider favorable to me or to the farm. In just the last couple of years, they have killed our tenant, which was not only a 15-year friend. They've killed him at the hospital. They have sent the Ontario Provincial Police to protect what claims to be Animal Protection, who got a complaint against us saying we were mistreating our goats. And since they couldn't find one of the 18 goats that was mistreated, they killed my sheep because it was old. They then proceeded to change the electromagnetic field on the farm so that what used to be 18 goats, one after the other, died of unknown causes, just stopped moving, knelt down. 2 days later, 3 days later, it was dead. So we're down to 3 goats, and have been that way for a couple of years now. They have placed animals on the farm that one could consider predators. Weasels, for example, are part of those animals. Raccoons. And the raccoons are an animal that has been designed in such a way as to not be much of a harm to anybody, turned into an animal that now gangs up and come in, and where they used to come in and steal an egg from a chicken coop as a single raccoon, they now come in packs and kill all the chickens. Wolves are not a problem in this area, but foxes are also a problem in this area. Weasels seem to have a lead role in mass murder. When I saw that this was happening, I got a person who was an expert in trapping animals to come in and explain to me what was happening and how to trap the predators, that kind of stuff. And he told me, and I have no way of knowing whether he was telling me the truth or not, he told me that he had been hired by the provincial government to trap animals and transfer them from one place to another where they wanted to add to the problem, such as this farm would be. And I said, well, why would they do that? And the trapper said, well, I saw some documentation while I was in their offices that would suggest that self-sufficient farmers who set up in a manner that they can feed their own family are a danger to box stores. And therefore, the government making large revenue streams from box stores compared to individuals should assist in preventing people from becoming self-sufficient. On this farm, after murdering the tenant, killing off animals, and sending in predators, they kidnapped my wife, whose nationality is American. And they attempted to throw her out of the country something like 4 times by dumping her on the highway in New York State, when in fact she was raised in California. And once even in the middle of the night, 12:30 at night on a highway in New York State may not be the safest place to be, especially since you were gardening when you were grabbed off the farm by the Ontario Provincial Police and handed over to the border security people, who handed her back to the local police, who then went out of their jurisdiction to dump her into the U.S. But 70-some days in jail followed the fact that every time they put her on the U.S. side, she walked back. We're only 30 miles from the U.S. border here on the farm, so and she would be arrested again. And finally, they dropped all charges, put her on a plane, and flew her to California, where just before they landed, they tried to arrange some kind of argument or fight on the plane, which she didn't react to. And the captain called the police to be ready to receive what is Jennifer, Jennifer, a 60-year-old director of nursing, managing an Alzheimer institution's staff of nurses made no sense. And when she got off the plane and police talked to her, they wouldn't follow up on what was wanted by Canada's security people. But all of that clarified in our minds, me especially, but also the Pineal Court, that there were places in the world, and have been for thousands of years, that genetically engineer people. And they're given a contract and they go about engineering people, Syria being one of those places, by the way. And then cause a war in their own country and create mass movement of refugees. And in that manner, they can get other countries to accept refugees who have no idea what's going on. The genetics that they carry, however, can lead to the birth of sleeper cells. They themselves can be a sleeper. Their children can be a sleeper. Their grandchildren can be a sleeper. The great-grandchildren can be sleepers. It's 4 generations that over time they take over a country. They don't want to take over the country itself. They want to control the borders of the country. They've been doing it since Egypt's time in 2500 BC when they were building pyramids. At least in that time, there are not too many records before then that are public. So here on the farm, after killing the tenant, killing the animals, putting in predator animals, kidnapping my wife, what I was paying Ontario Hydro was $240 a month for hydro, and they sent me a bill for, I think the first one was $16,000. They said I owed them. And since then, that $16,000 they say I owed them grew to about $19,000. And when, of course, I refused to pay their fraud, they shut off the power. Knowing that something like this could happen, we had arranged 5 years after we got here, or so 3 years after we got here, to have a separate line, separate power source out in the field that you guys have been here, I've seen. So with the help of the cell and things I can't talk about, extension cords were placed on the second line and power brought to the house so that at least there would be running water, toilets functioning, and a place to feed the cat sanctuary, which this place had evolved into when Jennifer first came in 2013, I believe it was, when she was allowed for a period of about 2 years to fight the refugee claims that was the only way it could get her past the border. But there's a law between Canada and the United States that says both of them are good guys, and there is no reason for a refugee from either of the country, and therefore you've lost the refugee argument before you begin, because, hey, who in the U.S. would ever hurt a 60-year-old nurse who's directing what is considered to be the most valuable profession for future in this country, is expertise in taking care of Alzheimer's patients. And since Jennifer fit all those categories, they didn't want to go through any process other than the border process. And even the judge wouldn't sign the papers. He went off on a maternity leave. The appeal court wouldn't allow us to appear in court because they held a meeting which they didn't invite us to attend, and then told us because we weren't there, we lost. So all of that kind of stuff is going on. I've decided to live on the farm for as long as the cell and the pineal court asks me to and wants me to, and I want to, and Jennifer wants to come back. So all of us are focused on arriving at a conclusion about the people who are causing the problem, and is there a solution for the majority of people. The place we're at is there is no solution. However, the people should be told what's going on, and therefore the project should be built on this property and open by 2020. And once the people have been told, and whatever decisions they make then is their own, although they have to think with a brain that has been modified to think certain ways that are not helpful to their own survival, and determine what is the appropriate punishment for the bureaucrats who have caused the problem. And the last solution that I've heard is in an area around Antarctica, 100 miles offshore to 500 miles offshore, is a range of 400 miles offshore that contains around Antarctica millions of rock formations, which should in fact allow permanent solitary confinement with the system knowing what to do to keep people alive, not by any physical means, but by creation's help, for as long as necessary. So it's, if you look at a comparison in religion, it would be like purgatory. And the penalty paid by them would be comparable to what they caused to other people while they were in their responsibility, their task, and how they followed orders that made no sense to any person with a functioning brain, but makes sense to a person whose only interest is a retirement program that ends a career where they can manage people rather than work as the civil servants they were intended to be. We were having a discussion on a number of occasions, and I was told, the concept, for example, for hydro would be that you put each person solitary on one of these islands, little islands, and you give them an electric blanket, but no electricity, so that they would then have to deal with, for example, what they've done to me here. And I don't want to be pointing the finger at me as being any person more important than anybody else. They've done it to thousands of senior citizens, if not over time, millions and billions of people who've been treated miserably. Same bullshit, different day. So, is there a need to explain anything more that you're looking for?
Oh, Joe, did you have a question? You still there?
We've had 52 minutes,
yeah. So is this where we make calls to you from now on?
You can call. The phone doesn't ring. I have to be around and see it happen. That at least is the phone that I have now. Maybe that'll change over time. I still haven't figured out much about how messages work and that kind of stuff on this phone. But we'll see. It took me about 6 months to figure out the phone that I had before. And it was terrible, and this may prove to be better or worse, I don't know.
You might have to initially set up the voicemail on it.
Once I understand it, it's one thing to say do it, but doing it at the age of 75 is
yeah, you need one of us up there.
Yeah, that's why it would be helpful if any one of you guys could come and set something up. That was the intent at the beginning anyways, that but I don't have a vehicle, I don't have transportation. I have a wife that I love dearly and would like to have back here, and she knows some of that stuff. And from what the Pineal Court laid down for the people at Hydro, it's pretty simple. You guys can read it. It's posted on your site. We're not asking for heaven or the basic things we're asking is, you've manufactured a house in 1972 that would promote what your goals were you put people in who lived and died out of regular ways, who had children who are mentally handicapped, and a lot of things, rooms designed in the house for individual specific purposes, using the weapon of electromagnetism. And now, of course, you use the weapon of fraud to try to steal properties from senior citizens by sending them bills that make no sense. What we would like you to start with is to contact Jennifer, apologize, compensation for not allowing her normal life over the last 7 years, which includes what would have been her normal salary and some payment for the pain and suffering brought to her. As far as the house is concerned, we've said the house is worth about $350,000 if it were a real house. And a lot of people say it's worth more, but we're not looking to make money off the house. I want $150,000 would be needed to knock it down, and $350,000 would be needed to build it up after we've taken the necessary precaution to make sure that there is no electromagnetic interference in the house from underground as they have now. So bring a mobile home onto the site to stay here until construction is finished, and then think about this farm basically as one that shouldn't be using hydro, but should be using solar power. And let's talk about the future and how the property can be used so that the sale can then bring in the financiers who will build the project. Now, what I know about the project is that the intent is to build a structure that would cost somewhere around $500 million, $500 million. Have a fund of $245 to $250 million to operate this place, so that you don't have to count on anybody you don't want to interfere with what you're doing, and a separate $250 million for a legal fund to go after all the people who caused us the problems here. Not simply on this project, but in all projects that Hydro has had anything to do with, since they seem to be, they call themselves Hydro One. Well, we know that number one is in background in their coding structure. Number two is really number one. And if you consider how houses are built, then especially in the country, there is no piping coming from a water main. It's all wells. So it's who controls the wells, who controls the telephone lines, and who controls the energy that makes it all function. So Hydro, Bell Canada, and the municipality controls the digging of wells. Those people, their bureaucrats, are the cause of the problem. Whether they're called Bell Canada because I'm in Ontario, Canada, and that's what their name is, or they're called AT&T, or they're called whatever, they're all Bell Canada to me. It's just one large company with a lot of different names to confuse people. Hydro One is just one local company. Hydro One wants to run the future. The future is movement, transportation without conductors. It means that before you build a highway, you run an electromagnetic system underground, and then you build a highway over it. Before you build a house, you build an electro system under, and you put the house on it. But it's all basically managed and controlled by the water, the communications, and the energy. They are the cause of the problem. They have evolved over time. The story is linked in code in the Bible. For example, when Moses wanted to leave Egypt, and I think it was his brother, carried a rod, and when the rod was thrown on the ground, it sent sparks all over the place. Electromagnetism was known in the time of the writers of the Bible, at least. They put on top of each house a lightning rod. Then they took the lightning rod off the top of the house and put it in the ground under the house so that they could feed power into it and create electromagnetic fields underground. And when it was discovered that a rod takes 40 years or so to really arrive at its point of real effectiveness, they've changed the rod now for a plate, and they put a metal plate at the base of the ground wires because that's more effective. I had a telephone that could no longer be used because there was a defect in the input of power from the wire into the telephone itself. Just couldn't charge itself. So the answer was to find somebody who could repair it. Nobody could repair it. And if anybody could, you'd have to send it to Ottawa, and then it's in the hands of Bell, and who knows what the hell would happen. But with the research that Jennifer did, found a gadget called a plate. Wonder why? And you put it on, and you go around collecting solar energy in a solar bank, and you plug it into this plate, and it creates a small magnetic field on which you put your phone, and it gets charged without any wire connections. And I'm sure it's linked to things they're now putting in houses where you can get music without wiring and TV without wiring in different places, without understanding that in order to do that, the magnetic field is changed. And the magnetic field being changed will cause clumping in your bodies. And the clumping will result in cancer or in a stroke or in sore toes, sore feet at night when you go to bed, or in knees that can't support you past the age of 60, or in hips that make you walk funny because you have a problem with lifting your leg, or as they did with me, hydrocele, which is kind of a enlargement of the inside of the scrotum to the point where you as a male, I don't know quite the female structure, what happens there, but as a male, you lose your penis. It's not the penis left. It's everything else around it grew so that it's no longer the protruding instrument you had before. Very inconvenient in a time when you just got married. So that's the bottom half of the body. But, breast cancer is clumping. Heart attacks is clumping. Strokes is clumping. Alzheimer's is clumping. Common denominators are always electromagnetism caused by someone who wants to kill you. Knows you're going to die if they do what they do, but they do what they do anyway, so that their pension fund and their career will follow a path that benefits them. And when people have reached that point, there's the point of no return. So all you can do is tell people and then plan to do something which other people don't know about, but you will know about, but some people know about. And one of the persons who knows about it wrote a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And in there's a concept of a teacher, a student, and his support structure, his girlfriend. And they talk about what they need to learn. And what they show in the movie and talk about in the book is a concept called perfect speed. Don't tell me, Jonathan, that you want to go faster. 1,000 miles an hour is faster. 1,000,000 miles an hour is faster still. 1,000,000,000 miles an hour is faster again. But all of them have a limit. And what does not have a limit, Jonathan, the teacher says, is perfect speed. Because perfect speed doesn't require a journey. Perfect speed is being there. And if you want to be a human being and you want to get there as soon as possible, stop thinking like a machine and start thinking like a human being and act like one. and you will have arrived.
That makes sense.
I thank you for your call, and we'll talk again. Make sure you let me know by the usual means ahead of time.
Okay.
All right.
And gather questions. If I can answer, I will. But I'm trying my best to tell you everything I know.
You know.
Bye for now.
All right.
All right. Okay, Glenn.
All right.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.